What would you do if your husband came home early from his trip, not to surprise you, but to serve you legal papers? I thought I was clever enough to hide my affair, that he'd never find out. But he did, and his calm revenge was colder than anything I could have imagined. I used to tell people that trust was the foundation of every good marriage, and I said it so often, I almost believed it. Julian was the kind of husband everyone envied. Steady job, calm voice, no scandals, no surprises. He didn't drink, didn't flirt, didn't forget anniversaries. To outsiders, we were perfect. But perfection gets boring when you're the one keeping it polished. He thought he gave me stability. I thought he gave me a cage. When he told me he had to go abroad for 6 weeks for work, I pretended to be supportive. I smiled, said I'd miss him, even packed his luggage with a note tucked inside, something sweet and predictable. But the moment he left, the house felt different. Quiet, yes, but not lonely. Free. I didn't have to explain where I was going or who I was meeting. I could eat cereal for dinner and leave the laundry undone. It felt like breathing again. Everyone said I was lucky to have him, but luck felt more like a weight. Julian was careful in everything. His spending, his speech, even his affection. It was always measured. I wanted something reckless, something that reminded me I was still alive. That's when Adrian texted me. He was my ex from university, the one who used to make every room feel brighter. We hadn't spoken in years. His message said he'd seen my design work online and wanted to hire me for a small project. I told myself it was just business, but I smiled for the first time in months. My sister Ivy said it was harmless. "You're married, not dead," she joked. Even my friends agreed it was normal to need attention sometimes. I believed them because I wanted to. I told myself Julian wouldn't care. He had his meetings, his quiet life, his airport lounges. What harm could come from a little company? Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. The first week after Julian left was blissful. I remember standing in the doorway, watching his taxi disappear, and feeling something like relief instead of sadness. The silence inside the house wasn't heavy. It was clean, like wiping a slate. For the first time in years, I could play music as loud as I wanted, eat dinner at midnight, or leave clothes on the floor without anyone raising an eyebrow. I told people I missed him, of course. That was what a good wife was supposed to say. But deep down, I felt like I finally had space to breathe. Julian had left me with a detailed schedule, of course, bills, reminders, instructions for Mia's school runs. That was his way. Orderly, precise, boring. I looked at the list once and shoved it in a drawer. The house wouldn't fall apart if I relaxed for a few weeks. I even joked to Ivy that I was temporarily single. She laughed and said, "Good, maybe you'll finally start living again." It was on the third evening that Adrian messaged me. "Saw your new studio photos. Impressive work." That was all it said, but my heart jumped anyway. I told myself it was innocent, just a compliment. I replied with a simple thank you, but the conversation didn't stop there. He asked about my projects, then about my life, then about how marriage had changed me. I told him it hadn't, though we both knew I was lying. 2 days later, he dropped by the studio, claiming he wanted to discuss an upcoming renovation for his office. I told him to come in, pretending it was purely professional. He looked almost the same as before. Confident, funny, and just dangerous enough to make me forget about everything else. I offered him coffee, and we talked for nearly 2 hours, barely mentioning design. When he left, I caught myself smiling at my reflection in the studio window. It had been a long time since someone made me feel seen. That night, Julian called from his hotel. He asked how things were at home, if Mia was behaving, if I was managing all right. His voice was gentle, steady, the same tone he used for clients. I told him everything was fine, that we missed him. He said he'd call again the next night. I told him not to worry, that I was busy with new clients. After we hung up, I stared at my phone, wishing I'd felt something other than irritation. The following weekend, Ivy came over with wine and gossip. She said I seemed lighter without Julian around. You were starting to sound like a widow before he even left, she teased. I laughed, but her words stuck. Maybe she was right. Maybe marriage wasn't supposed to feel like suffocating under good intentions. When I told her Adrian had stopped by, she raised an eyebrow. Old flame, huh? Careful, that kind of spark doesn't stay small. It's harmless, I said. He's just a client. Sure, she said, smiling. For now. Over the next week, I found excuses to see him again. Consultations, color samples, whatever sounded professional. I didn't tell Julian, obviously. He wouldn't have understood. He never did. I told myself I was just helping an old friend. But the truth was, I liked how Adrian looked at me. Like I was still interesting, still wanted. He asked questions Julian never bothered to ask anymore. He said I had a glow. I said, maybe it was the lighting. One evening, as I was locking up the studio, he texted asking if I wanted to grab dinner, just to talk through ideas. I hesitated for maybe a second before saying yes. We met at a small restaurant downtown, the kind Julian would have found too noisy. It felt good to be there, to laugh too loud, to order another glass of wine just because I wanted to. Adrian told stories about traveling, about his failed relationships, about how some people mistake loyalty for love. I laughed, pretending not to understand what he meant. When I got home, the house was quiet again. Mia was asleep, and the dishwasher was humming softly. I checked my phone. 3 missed calls from Julian. I told myself he was just checking in too often. I called him back, acting cheerful. He said he'd been worried. I told him I'd been busy, that he shouldn't expect me to sit around waiting by the phone. He went silent for a moment, then said he understood. I could almost hear the disappointment in his breathing. After the call, I poured another glass of wine and looked around the empty living room. I told myself I wasn't doing anything wrong. Everyone needed company sometimes. It wasn't like I was betraying him. Not really. He was half a world away, and I was just keeping myself sane. Still, when I went upstairs, I caught my reflection in the mirror and didn't quite recognize the woman staring back. Her smile looked too sure, too practiced. That weekend, I texted Adrian again, asking if he wanted to meet to finalize the project details. He replied instantly, "Your place or mine?" I laughed even though no one was around to hear it. I typed back, "Mine's easier." And that was the moment, the exact one, where the line stopped being blurry. But I didn't care. I told myself Julian would never know. He was thousands of miles away, and I was finally free. Adrian came over on a Friday evening. I told him to park a few streets away so the neighbors wouldn't talk. It was supposed to be a simple meeting, just samples and sketches. But I'd cleaned the house as if it were a date. Candles, music, a dress that didn't look accidental. When he arrived, he looked around and said it felt strange being in a married woman's house. I laughed and said I was married, not buried. He grinned at that, and suddenly the tension felt like something alive in the air. We sat at the kitchen table, pretending to discuss the office layout, but our hands kept brushing, our eyes lingering too long. He asked if Julian minded me working so late. I said Julian trusted me completely. The words came out proud, like a dare. I poured us wine, and the conversation drifted. We talked about university, about how easy everything had been back then. I told him marriage wasn't hard, just dull. He said I deserved more than dull. It was all too easy. By the time he left, it was almost midnight. I stood at the door, thanking him for stopping by, but neither of us moved. Then he leaned in, just slightly, and said he missed this version of me, the one who laughed without thinking. I said he shouldn't say things like that, but I didn't mean it. When the door finally closed, I locked it and leaned against it, my heart beating too fast. The next day, I convinced myself it was nothing, just nostalgia. Julian called that afternoon, asking how Mia's school play went. I'd completely forgotten about it. I lied and said it was wonderful, that Mia had done great. He said he wished he could have been there. I told him it was fine, we managed. Then he asked, very softly, if I'd been busy at the studio. I said yes, too quickly. There was a pause before he said he was proud of me for keeping things together. That made me feel worse somehow. By the second week, Adrian was coming over more often. Sometimes during the day when Mia was at school, sometimes in the evenings when I said I was working late. I told myself Julian wouldn't mind if he knew, that he'd rather I had company than sit home feeling lonely. When guilt crept in, I brushed it aside. I was the one holding our life together, wasn't I? I deserved to feel good for once. My sister Ivy didn't help. She came by one afternoon while Adrian was there. I nearly panicked, but she just laughed when she saw him. So, this is the famous Adrian, she said. I introduced him as a client, but she gave me a knowing look. Later, when he left, she said, "You look happier than I've seen you in years. Just don't get caught." I told her she was being dramatic. She told me I was being naive. I started being careless, leaving glasses out, forgetting to delete messages, taking calls in the hallway. It didn't feel like danger. It felt like excitement. I loved how alive I felt when Adrian was around, how he made me laugh at things Julian would have scolded me for. When Julian called now, I sounded distant, distracted. He noticed. "You seem different lately," he said once. I replied that I was just tired. He asked if I was happy. I told him not to be ridiculous. Mia, of course, noticed things too. Kids always do. One night she asked why a man's car was in the driveway when she came home early from her friend's house. I told her it was someone from work, that she must have imagined it. She looked confused but nodded. I hated the way her eyes lingered on me, curious and unsure. Julian's mother called the next day. Her voice was calm but sharp. "I heard you've been entertaining guests," she said. I laughed it off, told her she shouldn't believe gossip, but I could tell she didn't buy it. When I told Ivy about it, she said I needed to be more careful. "You're giving people a reason to talk," she warned. I shrugged it off. People always talk. By the third week, Adrian started acting like it was normal, like we were something real. He'd cook at my house, leave his jacket on the couch, even text me while I was on the phone with Julian. I didn't stop him. I liked the danger. I told myself it was just a secret between adults, that no one was getting hurt. Then one night, after Adrian left, I found a note from Mia on the kitchen counter. Her handwriting was messy, but the words were clear. I told Grandma about Mommy's friend. She said Daddy will be mad. Please don't be mad at me. My stomach dropped. I crumpled the note and threw it away, but the damage was already done. I didn't know if Julian knew yet, but something in me felt cold, like the air right before a storm. 2 days later, Julian emailed me from abroad. He said his meetings were going well, but there was a change of schedule. He'd have to stay longer than expected. I sighed with relief. More time to clean things up, to breathe. I poured myself another glass of wine and texted Adrian to come over. I didn't know then that Julian had already booked his flight home. Julian came home on a Thursday night. I didn't even know until I heard the key turning in the lock. For a moment, I thought I was imagining it. The sound was so ordinary, it didn't fit the panic that suddenly filled me. I had just finished clearing away the dishes. Adrian's jacket was still draped over the chair. His cologne lingered faintly in the air. I froze, then ran through the kitchen like a thief in my own house, grabbing everything that didn't belong. When Julian stepped inside, suitcase in hand, I was standing there smiling too hard, my heart racing. "You're home early," I said, as if excitement could cover panic. He set his suitcase down quietly. "Meetings finished ahead of schedule," he said. "I thought I'd surprise you." His tone wasn't warm. It was careful, almost neutral. That frightened me more than anger would have. He looked around the house slowly, his eyes moving over every corner. I could see him noticing the details, the extra glass in the sink, the folded blanket that wasn't ours, the faint smell that didn't belong to him. "You've been busy," he said after a moment. I laughed too loudly. "You know me, always rearranging things." He nodded once but didn't smile. "Whose car was in the driveway last Tuesday?" I blinked. "Car? Probably a client," I said quickly. "Why?" He tilted his head, still calm. "Because the neighbor mentioned seeing it parked overnight." I felt the air leave my lungs. "People always talk," I said, forcing another smile. "You know how they are." He didn't argue. He just studied my face, like he was taking a photograph of every lie. Then he said quietly, "I know everything, Leora." The words landed like a stone in my stomach. "Everything?" I repeated, pretending confusion. "Julian, you sound crazy." He didn't raise his voice. "You should stop talking," he said simply. "You'll only make it worse." I wanted to scream, to demand proof, to take control again, but he didn't give me a chance. He picked up his suitcase and walked down the hallway. I followed him, panicking now. "You can't just show up and accuse me," I said. "You've been gone for weeks. You don't know what's been happening here." He turned slightly, his expression unreadable. "I know enough." That night, he slept in the guest room. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, waiting for him to come storming in, to shout, to demand answers. But he didn't. The silence was unbearable. I checked my phone. No message from Adrian. I typed one, then deleted it. In the morning, Julian acted like nothing had happened. He made coffee, packed Mia's lunch, helped her get ready for school. He was polite but distant. When I tried to talk, he said he was late for a meeting. He kissed Mia's forehead and left without looking at me. I wanted to believe it was all in my head, that he was just tired. But the way he shut the door, quietly, without hesitation, made my chest tighten. I called Ivy that afternoon, told her what happened. She gasped, half horrified, half thrilled. "He came back early. That's insane. You need to stay calm," she said. "Just deny everything. He has no proof." "What if he does?" I whispered. She hesitated. "Then make him look crazy. Say he's jealous, controlling. People already think he's cold." It sounded cruel, but also practical. That was how I'd survived before, by twisting the story before anyone else could. So that's what I did. I posted a photo of the three of us from before his trip, captioned, "Family time again, nothing better." The comments were full of hearts and compliments. From the outside, we still looked perfect. That evening, Julian came home late. He didn't touch his dinner. I told him I was worried about him, that he seemed distant. He said, "You should be more worried about yourself." His voice was so calm it scared me. Before going to bed, he left his phone charging on the counter. I glanced at it, tempted to see what he knew, but I was too afraid. I couldn't tell if he'd really seen something or if he was bluffing. I tried to believe the latter. He wasn't the type to snoop. He was too proud for that. 2 days later, Adrian called. I answered quickly, whispering in the pantry while Mia watched TV. He asked if everything was fine. I told him Julian didn't know anything. I even laughed to sound relaxed. What I didn't know was that Julian had walked in at that exact moment. He stood in the doorway, silent, listening. I turned around and nearly dropped the phone. He didn't shout. He didn't even look angry. He just said, "You might want to save that number. You'll be hearing from him again, through your lawyer." I tried to laugh it off, but my voice cracked. "You're being ridiculous, Julian." He nodded once, like a man who's finished a long calculation. "No, Leora, I'm being practical." Then he walked out again, leaving me alone in the kitchen, my pulse hammering in my ears. For the first time, I realized the calm wasn't mercy, it was preparation. The days after that felt like I was living in a movie where I didn't know the script anymore. Julian didn't fight, didn't accuse, didn't even ask questions. He just moved around the house like a guest waiting for checkout time. He took Mia to school, answered work emails, smiled when neighbors waved. It was terrifying how normal he acted. Every time I tried to bring up the conversation, he would say, "Not now." The silence was worse than any shouting could have been. I told myself I could still fix it. If I stayed calm, if I spun the story right, people would believe me. I'd always been good at that, turning awkward truths into misunderstandings. I started by calling Ivy. She said I had to get ahead of the narrative. Her words, not mine. "People are going to talk, Leora," she said. "You need to make him look unreasonable. Say he's jealous. Say he's distant. Everyone already knows he's cold." So that's what I did. I met friends for coffee, laughing too loudly, talking about how strange Julian had been since returning. I told them he'd been going through my things, questioning my calls, accusing me of ridiculous things. They nodded, sympathetic. "You deserve better," Vanessa said. "You've been holding that marriage together for years." I smiled and pretended to believe it. That evening, I found Julian at the dining table, sorting through papers. "We should talk," I said. He looked up briefly. "About what?" "About us," I said. "You've been acting distant and it's hurting Mia." He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Mia's fine. I'm the one who's been hurt." I crossed my arms. "You're not the only one with feelings, Julian." He stared at me for a long time. "You wouldn't know that from your behavior." I told him I didn't like his tone, that he sounded controlling. He gave a small, humorless smile. "That's one word for it," he said, and went back to his papers. That night I went to sleep angry. The next morning, he was gone before sunrise. Mia said he'd taken her to breakfast before school. When they came back, she ran upstairs to pack a small bag. I asked what she was doing. She said, "Daddy said I'll stay at Grandma's for a few days. He says the house is too noisy lately." My chest tightened. "He didn't ask me," I said. She shrugged, innocent. "He said you needed rest." When Julian returned that afternoon, I confronted him. "You can't just take her without asking." He was calm, as always. "It's temporary," he said. "She needs stability right now." "She has it here," I snapped. He met my eyes. "No, she doesn't. Not when men are visiting her house when I'm away." I froze. "You're twisting everything. He was a client." He nodded slightly. "Then you'll have no problem explaining that to your lawyer." I felt my stomach drop. "You're really going through with this?" He gathered a few papers, stacked them neatly, and said, "I'm already through with it." When he left the room, I stood there shaking. I called Ivy again, told her Julian was losing it. She told me to post something that made me look calm, collected, misunderstood. So I did. I posted a photo of myself and Mia from last month, captioned "Learning to stay kind even when life gets messy." The likes came in fast. Messages from friends saying they admired my strength. It felt good for a moment. Then the guilt came creeping back. That evening, Clara called. Her tone was icy. "Julian's done being your prop, Leora," she said. "You should prepare yourself." "For what?" I asked, trying to sound unbothered. "For consequences," she said, and hung up. 2 days later, a message appeared in my inbox from an unfamiliar address. The subject line was simple: legal notice, custody and property review. My hands went cold as I opened it. There were attachments, screenshots of messages, photos from the driveway, even time-stamped receipts from the nights Adrian came over. Proof, all of it organized, labeled, professional. I stared at the screen, my pulse hammering. How had he gotten everything? I deleted the email immediately, then sat on the couch staring at the blank TV screen. When Julian came home that night, I asked why he was doing this. He looked at me without emotion. "Because truth doesn't need a story, Leora. It just needs time." "You're trying to ruin me," I said. He shook his head. "No. You did that yourself. I'm just documenting it." I wanted to scream, to claw back control, to make him feel small the way I used to. But his calmness swallowed every argument I had. He wasn't angry anymore. He was certain. When he went upstairs, I sat there in the half-dark kitchen, surrounded by the quiet hum of the refrigerator. For the first time since he'd come home, I understood the danger. Julian didn't want revenge in the way people imagine it. He wanted justice, and he had patience on his side. And as much as I hated to admit it, that scared me more than anything. The morning the envelope arrived, I knew what it was before I even opened it. Thick paper, formal seal, the kind of thing that didn't belong in an ordinary mailbox. I carried it into the kitchen like it might explode. Mia was at school, thank God. My hands shook as I slid a finger under the flap and pulled out the pages. The words petition for legal separation and custody review jumped out immediately. Julian had filed everything. Quietly, efficiently, like he'd been planning it for weeks. I sat down hard, staring at the stack. There were copies of text messages, screenshots of emails, even a few photographs. One of them was from that night Adrian had parked too close to the house. Another showed me unlocking the door while Julian was abroad. I felt sick. I didn't know which hurt more, the invasion or the accuracy. Every detail was there, no room to twist or edit. When Julian came home that evening, I waited by the door. "So this is it?" I said. "You're divorcing me like I'm a business contract." He didn't flinch. "I'm not divorcing you, Leora. I'm protecting Mia." "You're punishing me," I snapped. "That's what this is." He hung up his jacket slowly, methodically. "I don't punish people. I prepare." I wanted to slap that calm expression off his face. Instead, I followed him into the kitchen, my voice rising. "You're going to regret this. Everyone will see what kind of man you really are." He poured himself a glass of water. "They already do." That night, I called Ivy. She came over, looked through the papers, and swore under her breath. "He's serious," she said. "He's got everything documented. Bank accounts, phone records, witnesses." "Witnesses?" I repeated, horrified. She nodded. "Neighbors, maybe even your friends. He's been talking to people for weeks, Leora." I laughed, though it came out shaky. "He's trying to make me look like a monster." She sighed. "No, he's making himself look reasonable." Her words hit harder than I expected. Reasonable. That's what everyone would believe. The calm one, the quiet one, the one who never raised his voice. I was the emotional one, the dramatic one. The story would tell itself. The next morning, Julian left early with Mia again. When I called to ask when he'd bring her back, he said, "She'll stay at my mother's for a few days. It's better for her." I tried to argue, but he'd already hung up. By noon, I was at his lawyer's office, demanding a meeting. They brought me into a small room with glass walls. Everything smelled like paper and disinfectant. A man in a grey suit greeted me politely and handed me a folder. "Mr. Vale has requested we proceed as amicably as possible," he said. "Amicably?" I laughed. "He's destroying my life." The lawyer didn't even blink. "He's exercising his rights. You'll see he's offered joint financial settlement terms." I flipped through the pages. My name was being removed from the house deed. The joint account was closed. The custody section had long paragraphs underlined. Words like stability, exposure, and evidence of infidelity jumped out at me. "You can't just erase me from my own home," I said. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. "He's not erasing you. He's filing for sole ownership due to breach of marital trust. You'll still receive partial assets." Partial. That word made me tremble. I stood up, trying to sound strong. "Tell Julian this isn't over." The lawyer's tone stayed calm. "He asked me to give you something." He handed over a single envelope. Inside was a short note in Julian's handwriting. "Stop performing. Start telling the truth." I crushed the paper in my hand, tears burning my eyes. When I left the office, I sat in my car for nearly an hour, staring at the steering wheel, trying to decide who to call. Adrian, Ivy. No one could fix this now. That night, I showed up at Julian's apartment. He opened the door without surprise, like he'd been expecting me. "You in," I said. "Is that what you wanted?" He looked at me quietly. "This wasn't a game, Leora." "Then what was it?" I asked, voice shaking. "Revenge?" He shook his head. "Justice." I laughed bitterly. "You'll regret this when Mia starts asking why her mother isn't around." "She already has," he said softly. "And I told her the truth, that you made choices." That hit harder than I thought it would. I wanted to scream at him, tell him he was cruel, but he stepped aside and pointed toward the hallway. "There's an agreement on the table. Read it. You'll understand what freedom really looks like." When I went back to the house later, I found another envelope taped to the front door. It was a court order, temporary custody granted to Julian, pending full hearing. The words blurred as I read them. I sat on the porch, shaking, while the street around me stayed quiet. Inside, the house smelled of dust and old flowers. I walked through each room slowly, noticing how empty everything felt without him or Mia there. On the table, the legal papers lay where I'd left them that morning. I picked them up again, but the words didn't even make sense anymore. Julian hadn't yelled, hadn't shamed me, hadn't even demanded an apology. He'd done something worse. He'd turned the truth into silence and let the law speak for him. The morning of the hearing, the sky was grey and heavy, like it knew what was coming. I dressed carefully, picking the same pale blouse I'd worn on our honeymoon flight, as if fabric could carry luck. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined. Nothing dramatic, just four walls, too much quiet, and Julian sitting across the room, calm as ever. He didn't look at me when I entered. He just nodded politely, as if we were strangers meeting by coincidence. His lawyer spoke first, his tone steady, unhurried. He listed every date, every receipt, every message, laying out the story like a puzzle where all the pieces fit perfectly. My own lawyer tried to object here and there, but every time he looked at me, I could see it in his eyes. This case was already lost. Julian's voice was soft when he finally spoke. He didn't accuse me or raise his voice. He just said he wanted stability for Mia and closure for both of us. He said he wished me peace but couldn't live inside a lie anymore. The words stung because they sounded kind. The judge asked if I had anything to say. I opened my mouth but couldn't think of a single sentence that didn't sound rehearsed. When it was over, the judge's ruling came fast. Temporary custody became permanent. Property transfer approved. No alimony due to marital breach. My signature was required on 3 pages, and that was it. Marriage erased by ink. Julian stood as the judge left. He thanked the lawyers, then turned to me for the first time that morning. "You got what you wanted," he said quietly. "Freedom." I wanted to answer, but nothing came out. He picked up his briefcase and walked out without looking back. I stayed seated until the clerk touched my shoulder and said I could go. Outside, the air was sharp and cold. Reporters weren't there, thank God, but people still watched. Family friends, neighbors, even Ivy standing near the steps, her face pale. When she saw me, she shook her head slightly, as if she couldn't decide whether to comfort me or say I told you so. I walked past her without a word. Back home, the house didn't feel like mine anymore. Boxes lined the hallway, labeled with my name in Julian's neat handwriting. He'd already moved out what was his. Books, tools, photo frames with faces missing. I went room to room, touching walls, curtains, chairs, all the things that used to mean something. The smell of his cologne was gone, replaced by something metallic and empty. I poured myself a glass of wine, though it was barely noon, and sat at the kitchen table. The same spot where he'd once read the morning paper, where Mia had done her homework, where I'd laughed with Adrian like it was harmless. It all looked smaller now. I pulled open a drawer and found the last envelope, the one the lawyer had promised would arrive after the ruling. Inside was a single document: Final Custody and Property Confirmation. Vale v. Vale. Attached was a letter in Julian's handwriting. It said, "I hope you find what you were looking for. I've made sure Mia will always be safe. Please don't contact her until she's ready. This is not out of cruelty, it's protection, for her and for you." There was no anger in it, no bitterness, just finality. I crumpled the letter, then smoothed it out again, not sure what to do with my hands. I tried calling Ivy, but she didn't answer. Then Vanessa, who said she was too busy to get involved. Even Adrian didn't reply. His number had gone out of service. The silence around me was absolute. By evening, I wandered outside, barefoot on the porch, the wind cutting against my skin. The neighborhood lights glowed faintly, and for a second, I thought about knocking on someone's door, saying something like, "It wasn't supposed to end like this." But no one would have believed me. Back inside, I found Mia's note still stuck to the refrigerator, her little handwriting from weeks ago. "Please don't be mad at me." I touched the paper gently, realizing she'd been the only honest one. The clock ticked louder as the night settled in. The house creaked like it was exhaling, relieved to be free of pretending. I sat at the kitchen table again, staring at the final decree, the judge's seal embossed in perfect gold. It struck me then that Julian hadn't shouted, hadn't punished me, hadn't sought revenge. He'd done something colder. He'd made sure the truth didn't need his voice to destroy me. And when the wind rattled the windows, I finally understood the sound. It wasn't anger or regret. It was the sound of something closing for good. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.